I did this because I was like, oh my God, like healthcare is like such a dinosaur. There's so many areas in which medicine needs to improve, and who's, if not me to improve it, who's going to do it, right? And then if not you, who's going to improve anesthesiology? Like, right? We need people who have this mindset of like entrepreneurship and like improving the current state of things to be disruptive in medicine, where innovation can like, be used to help patients and actually improve the system.
Wish you could just fast forward your life to the future, just to see what's going on? Us too. And while we couldn't break the time-space continuum, we can bring you the next best thing. You're listening to When I Grow Up, a podcast that matches Hopkins students with the people they dream of being in the future. Tune in to access intimate conversations with CEOs, entrepreneurs, artists, and hear answers to the questions we all wrestle with. Here's our student host for today's episode.
Hi, my name is Sunny Patel. I'm a third-year junior majoring in biophysics and psychology at Johns Hopkins University. Today, I'll be interviewing Josh Yang.
Hi, my name is Josh Yang, and I'm from San Diego, California, but currently live in Palo Alto. I'm a biotech co-founder of a startup called Nephrosant, which is a Series A startup that is commercializing kidney disease diagnostics to help patients with kidney transplants prevent rejection of their organ. I'm also currently a Stanford MBA business student. But before this, I was actually living in Baltimore as well, doing an MD PhD program at the Johns Hopkins University. I wanted to do an MD PhD because I thought that doing research and helping patients at the same time was the best of both worlds. But now I also realize that in order to get the research to the hands of patients, you also need some business sense. Okay.
Yeah, I'm Sunny. I'm a third-year student here at JHU. So I came in as a biophysics major. And then over my time here at undergrad, I really delved deep into like med tech. So I do want to pursue a career in anesthesiology at the moment and go to medical school. But I'm super stoked about like the business side of things too. And that's where I really wanted to hear about your story, your path. And you seem to be, first you headed towards the MD PhD path and then also switched gears into MBA, and it sounds like you're doing something you love. So would love to hear more.
Yeah, definitely. I can sort of tell you a little bit about my path. I thought I'd be a rheumatologist treating people with autoimmune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis, because I had volunteered at a clinic where there were patients with rheumatoid arthritis who found it very difficult to move or move with pain. But because of the miracles of like modern medicine and like antibody-based immunologics, these people were able to like play the piano again or open jars again. And they would go to these doctor's office visits like so excited that they could do these things again. And so that was so inspiring that I also wanted to be a rheumatologist. But I also knew that I wanted to do research at the same time, because even though a lot of these patients did come in with their pain relieved, many did not. And they had to try many different kinds of medications before they were able to get any sort of relief. And I knew that there were still new medicines waiting to be discovered to help all these patients. And so that's a part of the reason why I wanted to be a physician scientist or go do an MD PhD program. And so when I decided to go to Johns Hopkins for the MD PhD, I had full plans to be a rheumatologist, do bioengineering for the PhD, and one day come up with new therapies for these patients. But what I discovered though is that so much of the research that you do in like research labs, I'm sure you've seen this yourself, the research you do like ends up like stuck in the notebooks, or sometimes they make it to the academic journals where it just stays in the journal and doesn't actually ever help patients or reach the hands of the people who could use it to help patients in the future. And I knew that the way to actually get these laboratory innovations to the patients was through commercialization of these technologies. And so that's why for me, I thought that not only do I need to like pursue entrepreneurship, but I also want to do an MBA to get those skills myself so that I can understand both the clinical side, the scientific side, and the business side.
Right. So if I may ask, are you still planning to pursue your MD PhD after finishing your MBA?
So I probably will be dropping the PhD portion, not because I don't think a PhD is valuable. I think a PhD is valuable, but I also think like of opportunity cost to pursue like so many degrees and so much time is at some point in your life, you have to transition away from like accumulating knowledge and to start like using your knowledge, right? And I think that at this point, I've accumulated quite a bit of knowledge. And at this point, I have 17 like peer-reviewed papers, 4 patents, which is far more than most PhD graduates have. So part of it's like, I don't think I need the PhD to learn the scientific skills I need to be successful in medical device or biotech entrepreneurship. But I do plan to finish the medical degree part, because I think being being a doctor is something that not only is like valuable inherently, but I think gives a good credibility signal, so that when you want to do innovations, like if you want to do innovation like anesthesiology, of course, if you are an anesthesiologist, right, you're much more likely to be able to do that innovation than if you were not. So are you planning to apply to medical school soon, or what's your track like right now?
Yeah. So my plan currently is I'm a third year, so I still have this year, next year. By the background I had so far with like academics and stuff, I feel like my application for medical school, like the aspect was lacking is clinical at the moment. Just kind of getting that patient experience. I did have like volunteer experience before the pandemic hit. And then once the pandemic hit, like everything kind of got flushed down the drain. So I'm kind of rebuilding my portfolio right now. And then I thought it'd be a really good idea for me. And I've always kind of dreamed about it too since high school, is to be an emergency room technician. I think just like, yes, a doctor is like really good academically, but people in the emergency room know what to do like that. Like I want to be that person. Like if someone's hurt, like be like, wow, like I could like just like, like it just second nature to just be like, I need to do this, this, and this. So currently I'm looking into experiences that would enable me to pursue an ER technician role after college, and kind of use that time to, obviously learn about the hospital setting, but also like get time to like do other things that like I feel like here at Hopkins it's always just been like books, books, books. And I really want to like apply myself more. I mean, crossroads between like that ER tech position and also like pursuing something in med tech.
Okay, so like you would, while doing this ER tech thing, you would pursue some sort of entrepreneurial med tech endeavor. Is that?
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas right now?
The hard part is just I'm third year now, and I know a bunch of people who've gone into like design team and who are part of startup culture, but because of the curriculum I've taken here at Hopkins, I feel there's like a disconnect where I can't join anything because so many of people in my like line of path have been going into PhD programs. Like most people in my class are already considering PhDs, while I'm considering like an MD business kind of career, which is kind of different than everyone else around. So.
Yeah. It's when I was in undergrad as well. Like I didn't even know people like went into business with like medical degrees in mind or PhDs in mind. Like I thought everyone just went to academia and then ended up working in a hospital or in a lab. But there are actually quite a few like MD, MBAs, or just even pure MDs who focus mostly on the business side of things. So you are definitely not alone like on this track. I'm curious if whether you have you like interacted at all with the Johns Hopkins Technology Ventures like JHTV?
No, I have not yet. So I'm part of a couple organizations on campus that does not necessarily the startup culture side of things, but it's more like a networking kind of organization. So I've gotten a chance to like meet so many different people and kind of like learn about different like industries and different like technology that's coming out. But the hardest part about it is just like how to get those skills to get there, and if there's like time. But I'm super interested there are different like departments here that I've not heard of.
If you're like super interested in like medical device or like and doing something in medical device entrepreneurship after you graduate, I would definitely try to get to know the people at the Johns Hopkins Technology Ventures. I know the student lead just left to start his own incubator in Baltimore. The guy whose name was Kevin Carter, but I believe he has been replaced already. And there's someone new running the technology ventures side for students. And I know so many like medical devices have actually launched out of there. Like, have you heard of ClearMask?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So they were a pre-pandemic company, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they like won a couple of like business plan pitch competitions, and they were part of like this JHTV like ventures arm. And they actually, of course, are doing very successfully right now in the midst of this pandemic. But so much of the, the advice they got was from like JHTV. And so I would highly recommend like getting to know the people there, because these are people that you can learn from, call like your colleagues. And like, if you want to be involved and learn the skills of entrepreneurship, like doing it alongside fellow entrepreneurs is the way to do it.
I know you come from a biology background yourself. So like, is there anything you would give like an undergrad advice for and like how to get started early? Or if you had to talk to like a younger self of you?
To get started earlier, like in business per se, is that what you're
Yeah, in
asking?
business. Yeah.
Honestly, I would say that having this biology background, or like in your case, this biophysics psychology background, is actually a plus, because if you think about all the people who are trying to go into business, like who are like have business major backgrounds like econ or like just actually business or any of these other ones, there are so many of them trying to get into business, right? And you are a unicorn in that sense, right? In that you have this like very specific topical knowledge that will be very valuable to many people, right? And to many organizations, because there are like so many like biotech venture capital funds, private equity firms, entrepreneurs, real startups, who want someone who is interested in the business, but also can deeply understand the biology and the science behind things, right? And you would be that person, right? And so I would say that in the grand scheme of things, you're actually like would be a more valuable member in specific contexts, right? And so I would say for you, like keep learning, like of course the science, but also focus on learning some of like the actual business terminology, like maybe take like a finance class or something at, I don't know if you've taken any finance classes or anything, but like some like introductory finance, introductory accounting, some of these like introductory courses, not necessarily so like you can like know how to like build a financial model, but like so they can speak the language more so, right? And so that when people start talking about, I don't know, discount rates and other things that are relevant to like starting a business and a company, like you'll understand what people are talking about. Although I know you're double majoring, so I don't know how many like
Yeah.
available units you have to do this, but I just like in my undergrad time, like right, I double majored, but my favorite courses were not ones that I actually took in my majors. Like it was all these other side courses. Like I took intro to acting, I took musical theater chorus, all of these like courses that had nothing to do with what my like future career is, right? Acting actually is very valuable in all careers, but uh, I would say like it's stuff that outside of your major that I think that can play such a huge impact on your life, because you already know with your majors what you plan to do with those, but it's about being exposed to all these new things, right? That you didn't know about before, you don't expect to have any difference in your life that could make the difference. I wanted to go back and ask you about,
Yeah.
so why do you want to do ER tech again? I understand you said like you want to like be able to be kind of like that person that can like just immediately know what to do in those circumstances, but why do you think you need to do that sort of like right after you graduate and prior to medical school?
Well, like I mentioned, like I used to volunteer at the hospital before the pandemic, but now it's like on like strict red flag, like no one come in circumstance right now. And I'm hoping that 2 years out, it will kind of settle and it'll be more so like how it used to be. Pfizer just came out with that big announcement with the vaccine. So fingers crossed there.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's like becoming a doctor has always been a dream as well. But not only a doctor, but like I mentioned, I've always wanted to like cross like medicine and technology. But you can't do. In my mind, I was like, it would be awesome to be a doctor who could do both. Like you said, like the business techie side too, because like the way we're headed, like all this like AI, like tech stuff, prosthetics are getting like really fancy. Like there's a big like cross happening. And I feel like I'm diverging from the question, but I don't want to like lose that side of medicine, that side of like knowing of what to do in a certain situation, and just kind of like getting my hands wet of like, like there's real patients out there, not only the ones described in textbooks. There's real people out there, and like the reason to do things that like like I kind of like have this like yes, I want to be a doctor and help people, but I've never like physically seen why people need help, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yes. And I can see like why, if you work in like the ER, right, you would definitely see why, or you would see people in need and you would see how various technologies and tools are helping these people. But I would also say that if that is the sole reason like why you would do this, like I would say that you should probably accelerate your timeline to apply to medical school rather than necessarily doing that. And I know a lot of people are always concerned about not having enough clinical hours or experience. And having looked at like applications before, like That's like a relatively minor concern. People, if you're applying to medical school, people are generally believe that you are committed to
Okay.
the clinical pathway, right? And I don't think you necessarily need to like delay your career, your future in like this intersection of medicine and technology, by a year or two, uh, to do that, right? It's while you could instead apply earlier, and then, for example, you
Get
can
the
apply.
same skills.
You get the same skills, and you in medical school, like you will see the need that patients will see, because most medical schools now, starting the first year already, you're already seeing patients, at least in the outpatient center setting or like in the community clinic setting. And so it's not like you have to wait till your third or fourth year of medical school before you start seeing like patients in need. You will start seeing this very quickly as soon as you enter medical school. And if you apply straight to like an MD MBA program, right, if you are interested in this intersection, you would be able to then not only see these patients, but also work on understanding the business side and how that can help these patients at the same time. I would say like there's no reason to like delay unnecessarily. And I also think that it's hard to do entrepreneurship when you are doing something else on the side, right? I think entrepreneurship oftentimes requires like a full-time dedication. And so like for me, like when I took a leave of absence from the MB PhD program, I spent 9 months of full-time work on the diagnostic startup Nephrosamus, because that was what was needed at the time in order to make sure that we could like do the next round of fundraising, get the necessary papers and like validity data to move forward. I was spent like 10 plus hours, even more a day, just working like on the company full time. And I think if your goal is to do medical device entrepreneurship, like if you are working as this ER tech, like full time, plus trying to do medical device stuff on the side, you won't get enough experience in medical device entrepreneurship, in my opinion. Because if you don't commit like fully to it, or if you're not in a context or setting that enables you to like practice that, like for example, MD MBA is different because like you are learning the skills necessary, right, to do medical stuff, to do entrepreneurial stuff, to do the combination of the two. And they offer opportunities for that. But if you're doing a full-time job separately, I think you won't be able to get as much of an experience as you could.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I know, like, it's something I've been like trying to reconsider. It was just like, is this really necessary? And I know medical school really like preps you up for that. I guess you also brought up a good point, like applying to MD MBA programs. I haven't really like looked into it as much, but is there a lot of like options to apply MD MBA, or is the common trend to go MD and then either take gap years in between to like finish up the MBA and come back, or like pursue the MBA after you graduate with the MD?
I think all of them are options.
Okay.
Like there are many MD MBA programs where you can do both in 5 years, so you shorten it by 1 year total. Like Hopkins has an MD MBA program, Harvard, Stanford, NYU, like all of the schools, most schools that have both the medical school and a business school typically offer the combined program as well. I know many people though who do the separate programs where they do take a gap in the middle of medical school to do a program either at a separate school, right? So one of my friends is doing her medical degree at Harvard, but she is doing her business degree at Stanford. And then there are people, of course, who have finished their medical degree and then either in the middle of residency or even afterwards are getting their business degree. So there is no rush necessarily to do the business part of it. And you don't necessarily even need a business degree, right, to do entrepreneurship or to do business. But these are the options that are available. And if you're thinking that doing an MD MBA is though something that you would want to do in your future, I don't think there's any reason to delay applying for that now versus later. Because the thing is, like, you're a third year right now in school. It's relatively straightforward to keep doing school until you reach the point where you're like, I've done enough school and now I have all the skills necessary to do what I want in life. But once you've like had a real job or are working, and then to go back to school is much more challenging. Because imagine, like, let's say you finish medical school, you become an anesthesiologist, you start getting paid very well, a great salary, relatively good lifestyle. Would you want to go back to school to pay like $120,000 a year when you just finished all your loans for medical school? It's much more challenging to go back to school and to do the entrepreneurial lifestyle, where under entrepreneurship, there's such a high risk that things are not going to work out, right? And you have to be willing to take those risks in order to do it. The further along you are in life in some ways, where you have more of a safety, you have more of like a cushion, more of like a great job, and all of these other things, it's much more difficult to take that leap of faith.
I know you mentioned like it's not necessary to pursue an MBA. So why did you take like a couple years off to go pursue? I know like you have your awesome startup, but like you mentioned, like was there a driving force that led you to go pursue your MBA? Was there something you were looking for with your degree?
Yeah, so I only applied to 2 business schools, and both were on the West Coast, and that was because I knew I needed to be somewhere where there was a great biotech hub, medical device hub, and the SF Bay Area was the one I wanted to be in. And I also knew that coming from like a purely medical and purely scientific background, right? I did not have the personal network myself of like, healthcare, biotech venture capitalists and investors and a large entrepreneurial network where I could, rely on or use to like advance my own entrepreneurial career, right? And I think you might understand like at Hopkins, right? Hopkins is of course a top tier medical institution, scientific institution, but entrepreneurship at Hopkins is not as strong as it is at other universities. And so because of that, I knew I needed to get this network and this entrepreneurial experience somewhere else. And so that's why I decided to go to do my MBA at Stanford. And to me, like the experience has been amazing, right? But not necessarily because of the classes I'm taking about business, but mostly because I am making friends and colleagues that I know will be people that when I am on this entrepreneurial journey, I can rely upon to call for all sorts of various needs. So I think why you would do an MBA depends. If you feel like you are developing your own strong entrepreneurial network already in this medical device space, right? Then maybe you don't need an MBA, right? Or if you already have a friend that is that business-minded person that is willing to do medical devices with you, you don't need to have all the knowledge within yourself, right? That's why startups typically have founding teams rather than a single founding member. And so really it's all about a reflection about why do you think you need to go on a certain path and what you will get out of it, and then making the best decision based on what you know.
It's so far, it just feels so far, but yet so close, like to consider all these like different options and getting into the workforce. That just like it seems all, it just like I want to be there, but at the same time, I don't want to, because it's just like, wow, it's just like it just seems so like surreal, if that makes sense. Like at some points I just want to be with my books, but at the same time I don't. So it's kind of a cross between. But can I hear more about what led you to, I guess like you meant, I'm assuming that you didn't find your startup by yourself. You had a team of people. So could you, I guess, speak more about like how that came to be?
Definitely. So I applied to medical school in my senior year of undergrad, right? And so when you apply to medical school in your senior year, you have one gap year before you would start medical school. Right. And so in this gap year, I decided to do a master's program focused on biotech entrepreneurship, essentially. And it was offered through UC Berkeley and UC San Francisco. And so I moved from San Diego up to the Bay Area and started this master's program, which is half coursework based, but also half capstone project based. And so when I was there, I met this professor who is an MD PhD herself. And she is a nephrologist. So she sees patients with kidney diseases, and specifically she sees people with kidney transplants. And she had found an unmet clinical need. She saw that there were these patients who would come in and they would not necessarily know whether their kidney was failing or not until it was almost too late in some cases, where the damage was like irreversibly already achieved, but the patient had no idea. And this is because the kidney is so good at doing its job. Even when it's 70% injured, the kidney can show very few signs of that there's something wrong. But because of that, right, also, once you get past 70% damage though, then things accelerate or deteriorate very quickly. This professor had this unmet clinical need, and she thought that there must be a way to non-invasively and inexpensively be able to predict or detect when these episodes of damage were occurring so that physicians could intervene. And my research in undergrad prior to that had all been in like the body doing damage to itself in autoimmunity, because I've been doing rheumatoid arthritis research. And I had been working on using different biomarkers to determine whether and how much injury was occurring in these autoimmune diseases. And so I thought that I could transfer these skills, translate what I used in the autoimmune space into the transplant space. And so I paired up with her to start this project where we tried to develop this non-invasive assay to detect kidney injury. For 10 months, we had no results. This is a lesson in persistence right here, because we tried many different ways to detect various biomarkers in urine. So we had people pee into a cup and we would try to measure biomarkers in it, but it was very challenging. Urine is a very tricky fluid to work with. But 10 months in, it started working, and it worked really well after very little optimization procedures. And so at that point, we had this technology that worked, and we wondered, was this something that could be commercialized, right? And so the way that I sought out to investigate that was I went to numerous pitch competitions and business plan competitions and started pitching. And after a while, we started winning like first place at multiple competitions. We had venture capitalists at these competitions come talk to me and say like, oh, we should have a meeting to discuss more about the technology. And at that point, we decided that, this was going to be like a real thing. And so at that point, we decided to incorporate. It was me, this professor at UCSF, and a third person who had a background in business and biostatistics in the diagnostic space from industry, on the industry side rather than from the academic side. And so the three of us co-founded the company, and it sort of launched from there. And we continued to work on the technology, worked on getting clinical samples for clinical trials, worked on opening our own laboratory to process these samples. And so it was really that, like, from that starting point, like sort of like exploded in terms of the amount of like work that went into it.
I know you mentioned you took a gap year after senior year. What exactly was like the program you went into? Was it a crossover between like what you try to do in undergrad, like business and bio?
Yeah. So in fact, I have to say, like in undergrad, right? As I said, I wanted to do MB PhD, right? 100% plan to be an academic scientist, and zero plans of entrepreneurship or business. I didn't even know like what business people did. So you're already far ahead of me in this sense. But I had a friend who was a year above me who did this master's program. It's called the Master of Translational Medicine, and it's offered jointly by UC Berkeley and UCSF. So you get two diplomas. And
sounds like a steal.
It sounds like a steal, right? And so he was like, "This is a really good program. You should do it. Like and he was also bioengineering majors like myself. And so I was like, sure, why not? Like, I have a year off in this gap year. It's time to, I can do this program for fun and like learn a few things. But that program really like changed my whole like career outlook. If I did not do that program, I would probably still be on the pure physician scientist track, trying to be a professor one day. It's because of this program that I really discovered like how entrepreneurship and specifically really medical devices worked, because we took classes on medical device regulatory affairs, reimbursement, clinical trials, intellectual property, all of it. You can name any part of like how medical devices need to be commercialized. We took a course on it. And so this program really like opened my eyes to like just how you took these laboratory technologies and were able to get it into the marketplace and thus into the hands of patients. And I know that there are similar programs at other universities, like I know Johns Hopkins, right, has CBIT, right, the Center for Bioengineering Innovation and Design. CBIT also has a master's program where you actually have two capstone projects for that master's program. And I've had numerous friends do it and have like come out like launching startups, or at least at a minimum having a really good understanding of the whole medical device process, and then going on to medical school and looking forward to doing entrepreneurship from that point. And so like those are things that I can also highly recommend if you were to do something between undergrad and medical school, because it's a structured way. Because I think biotech and medical device especially, there's so much regulations and so much like intricacies to starting up stuff in this space that's hard to learn just on the fly. It's not as simple as like starting a marketplace app on the iOS app store, right? It's very different than that.
Yeah.
And doing a program like this where you have a very structured approach to tackling medical device entrepreneurship all in one year, it was actually really such a catalyst for my own personal entrepreneurial journey.
Gotcha. So when you went to go pursue your MD PhD here at Hopkins, did you spend your year being I don't want to do this, but I want to do this kind of vibe? Like how that play out your first year?
Yeah, so my first year was like in the medical school portion, and honestly, medical school, once you get in, medical school is a lot of fun, and it's not,
I've heard.
yeah. And so it was not really like, oh, like I don't want to do this. It was really actually like I would listen to these lectures by, like by all these physician faculty members, and I would think to myself, like, how have we not solved this problem yet? Or like, wow, this looks like there's an unmet clinical need like in this area. Or like, is this the best medication that we have for this like disease? Like, this is crazy to me. And so like I actually started like a running list of like things that like the innovations are needed in each of these areas, right? And this is not something I would have done if I hadn't done this master's program, right? I did this because I was like, oh my God, like healthcare is like such a dinosaur. There's so many areas where innovation can like, be used to help patients and actually improve the system. And so the first year was actually such a great year because thinking that medicine is like a panacea and like, if you're a doctor, you can be able to cure all these patients. So having a really like realistic, nuanced view of how medicine works, and that there's so many areas in which medicine needs to improve, and if not me to improve it, who's going to do it, right? And then if not you, who's going to improve anesthesiology? Like, right? We need people who have this mindset of like entrepreneurship and like improving the current state of things to be disruptive in medicine.
Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up was something that's always like mind boggles me is like the entrepreneurship lifestyle. So I was going to ask you like, what like drives you to kind of like get up and like keep working on your project? It's not like homework where there's a due date. It's something that you want to get done. So I've always just like wondered from entrepreneurs, like what drives you to wake up early? I know like a lot of wake up like early in the morning, just to, like start getting their work done in that sense. Like what motivates you, and like what advice would you give to keep pushing on when things look dull?
Yeah. In terms of like what gets me up in the morning and like what drives me, like I think for me, it's latching on to like whatever single thing like you're so passionate about. And for me, like I am so passionate about like creating innovation. And so like waking up and like going into our company headquarters to the lab and working on inventing a new technology for our future pipeline products, like that is something that is so exciting to me, because to develop something new and be the first person to discover something, right? That is essentially what research is, to be the first person discovering something. And then, but being able then to immediately take that to the steps needed for commercialization, I think is something that is much more rare, right? And I think doing research in this startup environment is like truly fulfills that passion of mine of like getting that innovation done and then getting it on the path towards seeing patients. And so that's what like gets me up and keeps me going. And of course, and that's like, there are so many things that are involved with that. Like, of course, like talking to the attorneys and like making slide decks and all these things. Not all of that is exciting work, right? But it's this broader picture of, am I doing the broader picture of what I love and I want to be doing? And the answer is yes. So, and I think for you, you have to figuring out like where you think you want to make your impact in the world, right? At least for that, it doesn't have to be like your lifelong vision, but like in a period of time, and then using that as your like inspiration, I think is what I've been doing. I think that as long as my personal philosophy is that as long as you're like enjoying the journey and you are super passionate about whatever you're doing in this exact moment, that's going to open doors for you later and you'll be fine.
Yeah, that was like a lot that I had trying to think, but yeah, thank you so much, for all the insight, for all like the wonderful experience about like which direction I should head in. I know there's a lot of ambiguity and everyone has a different path, but you really like kind of showed me like, everyone's different, everyone's unique, and you could still get to the end result if you work on it.
Yeah, it was so great meeting you as well, and like learning about your career aspirations, and like it's so great to see someone else who's so excited about like the intersection of like medical devices and business, and who is also a fellow Blue Jay. So
yeah, today was awesome. Thanks you so much for the insight. I'm really looking forward to connecting with you in the future.
You have been listening to When I Grow Up, brought to you by Higher Hopkins and Hopkins Connect at Johns Hopkins University. Thank you to our When I Grow Up podcast team and all the people who make this podcast possible, including our editor, Thomas Nishimoto, our host students, and all of our guests.